Please, I didn't do it. You have to believe me.
She begged them to listen. Her voice cracked as tears streamed down her face. But the mansion door slammed shut anyway. The rain pounded harder, soaking through her thin jacket as she stood there in the darkness, clutching a small bag that held everything she owned. Just hours ago, she had a roof over her head and a paycheck coming. Now she had nothing. No job, no references, no future. The accusation had been swift and brutal. A missing diamond bracelet she had never even touched. And before she could defend herself, she was thrown out into the night like garbage. But what she didn't know, what nobody in that house knew, was that this moment would unravel secrets that had been buried for decades. Secrets powerful enough to destroy a family's carefully constructed empire. Sometimes the people we look down on are the ones who end up changing everything. This is one of those stories. The rain hadn't stopped. Maya Rodriguez stood at the iron gates of the Wellington estate, shivering as water dripped from her hair down her back. She was 23 years old, alone and scared. Behind those gates was the only job she'd had in 2 years. The only stability she'd known since leaving her small hometown in search of something better. She'd arrived in the city with $40 in her pocket and a dream that felt foolish now. She'd worked as a housekeeper for the Wellingtons for 18 months, cleaning their marble floors, organizing their walk-in closets, preparing meals that cost more than her monthly salary. She was invisible to them most days, just another face in the background of their privileged lives. But she'd been grateful. She'd sent money home to her younger sister who was still in school. She'd saved a little each month, hoping maybe one day she could afford night classes, maybe become something more than just the help. All of that ended tonight. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The accusation came out of nowhere. Victoria Wellington, the matriarch of the family, had discovered her diamond bracelet missing from her jewelry box. It was worth $30,000, a gift from her late mother, and she was certain she'd left it on her dresser that morning. Maya had been the only person in the bedroom that day, tasked with changing the linens and dusting the furniture. When Mrs. Wellington confronted her, Maya's heart nearly stopped. She'd never stolen anything in her life. She tried to explain that she hadn't even opened the jewelry box, that she always avoided touching personal items. But Mrs. Wellington's eyes were cold and accusing. The head of household was called. Then Mr. Wellington arrived, his face red with anger. They didn't search her belongings. They didn't call the police. They just wanted her gone immediately, before she could taint their home any further with her presence. Maya pleaded with them to check the security cameras, to give her a chance to prove her innocence. But Mr. Wellington cut her off sharply. He told her she should be grateful they weren't pressing charges, that they were showing her mercy by simply firing her. Mercy. The word felt like a slap. So there she stood in the rain, her phone dead, her bank account nearly empty, with nowhere to go. The buses had stopped running for the night. She didn't have money for a cab, and the shelter was miles away. She started walking, her bag growing heavier with each step, her mind racing with thoughts of what she would do, how she would survive, how she would explain this to her sister who depended on her. She'd made it about 3 blocks when the headlights appeared behind her. A black sedan slowed down, its window rolling down smoothly. Maya kept walking, her guard up. She'd heard too many stories about what happened to women alone at night in this part of town. But then a voice called out, concerned and familiar. It was Ethan Wellington, the eldest son of the family, the groom whose wedding was just 2 weeks away. He'd been away on business and had just returned home when he saw her walking in the rain. Ethan was different from the rest of his family. He'd always treated her with basic human respect, asking about her day, thanking her for her work. Now his face showed genuine alarm as he took in her soaked clothes and tear-stained face. He asked her what happened. Maya's first instinct was to lie, to protect herself, but exhaustion won out. She told him everything, her voice shaking, expecting him to drive away the moment he heard about the bracelet. But he didn't. Instead, his expression darkened. He told her to get in the car. Maya hesitated, But the rain was relentless and she was freezing. She climbed into the passenger seat, grateful for the warmth. Ethan didn't take her back to the mansion. Instead, he drove her to a small hotel downtown and paid for a room for the week. He gave her $200 in cash and his business card, telling her to call him if she needed anything. Maya couldn't understand why he was helping her. She was just a maid, someone his family had just discarded without a second thought. But Ethan looked troubled as he stood in the hotel lobby. He told her something that would stick with her for days. He said his family had a habit of making quick judgments, and that he'd learned over the years not to trust their version of events without asking questions first. He promised he would look into what really happened. Then he left, and Maya was alone again, but this time with a small flicker of hope. The next morning, Ethan Wellington did something he'd never done before. He questioned the household staff. He started with the other housekeepers, the cook, the gardener, anyone who might have seen something. Most of them were too scared to talk, worried about losing their own jobs. But one of the younger maids, a girl named Sophie who'd been friendly with Maya, finally broke. She told Ethan she'd seen something strange. Mrs. Wellington's daughter, Natalie, had been in her mother's room the day the bracelet went missing. Natalie was Ethan's younger sister, and she'd been acting erratic lately, spending money she didn't have, coming home at odd hours. Ethan felt his stomach turn. He went to the security office and demanded to see the footage from that day. The head of security initially refused, saying Mrs. Wellington had given strict orders not to review the tapes, that the matter was closed. But Ethan was the heir to the Wellington fortune, and when he insisted, the security chief had no choice. They watched the footage together, and there it was, clear as day. Natalie entering her mother's room, opening the jewelry box, and slipping the bracelet into her purse. Ethan sat in stunned silence. His sister had framed an innocent woman. The question was why. He confronted Natalie that evening. At first she denied everything, but when he told her he'd seen the security footage, she broke down. The truth spilled out in a mess of tears and excuses. She had gambling debts, tens of thousands of dollars owed to people who weren't patient. She'd taken the bracelet to sell it, planning to replace it with a fake before anyone noticed. When Maya happened to be in the room that same day, Natalie saw an opportunity. She could let the maid take the fall, and no one would question it. The wealthy family would believe the word of their daughter over a poor housekeeper any day. Natalie begged Ethan not to tell their parents, promised she'd fix everything, claimed she'd pay back the debt somehow. But Ethan was done protecting his family's reputation at the expense of others. He told her she had two choices: confess to their parents herself, or he would do it for her. That night, the Wellington household erupted in chaos. Mrs. Wellington refused to believe it at first. She accused Ethan of being manipulated, suggested that Maya had somehow convinced him to lie for her. But when they reviewed the security footage together, when they saw their own daughter stealing and lying, the reality was undeniable. Mr. Wellington's reaction was different. He was furious, but his anger wasn't directed at Natalie's theft. He was angry that Ethan had dug into family business, that he'd questioned the family's judgment, that he'd made them look foolish. He wanted to bury the whole thing, pay off Natalie's debts quietly, and move on as if nothing had happened. He certainly didn't want to apologize to a maid they'd already fired. But Ethan wasn't backing down. He told his father that Maya deserved an apology, that she deserved her job back, and that if the family wasn't willing to make things right, he would withdraw from the family business entirely. It was an ultimatum that shocked everyone. Ethan had never challenged his father like this before. He'd always been the obedient son, the one who followed the rules and kept his head down. But something had shifted in him. Maybe it was seeing Maya standing in the rain with nowhere to go. Maybe it was years of watching his family treat people as disposable. Whatever it was, he wasn't going to be complicit anymore. The days that followed were tense. Mrs. Wellington eventually agreed to apologize to Maya, though it was clear the words stuck in her throat like poison. Maya was offered her job back with a raise, but she hesitated. Could she really return to a house where she'd been treated so cruelly, where trust had been so easily broken? Ethan encouraged her to think it over, told her he'd support whatever decision she made. But there was something else happening beneath the surface, something Maya couldn't quite name. The way Ethan looked at her had changed. There was a softness in his eyes, a concern that went beyond simple guilt or obligation. And if she was honest with herself, she'd always noticed him too. She'd pushed those thoughts away because they were impossible, ridiculous even. A maid and the heir to a fortune? It was the kind of story that only happened in movies. But life has a way of surprising us. Over the next few weeks, Ethan found excuses to check on Maya. He'd bring her coffee when she was working late, ask about her sister, listen when she talked about her dreams of going back to school. They talked about books they'd read, places they wanted to travel, the kinds of deep conversations that revealed who they really were beneath their circumstances. 3 months passed. Maya had decided to stay on at the Wellington house, partly because she needed the money, but mostly because she wanted to see where things with Ethan might go. His wedding had been called off. His fiancée, a woman from another wealthy family, had shown her true colors when the scandal with Natalie broke. She'd been more concerned about how it would reflect on her family's reputation than about the injustice done to Maya. Ethan realized he'd been engaged to someone he barely knew, someone who didn't share his values. The breakup was messy, but he didn't regret it. By the time autumn arrived, Ethan and Maya's relationship had become undeniable. They tried to keep it secret at first, knowing how the family would react. But love doesn't stay hidden for long. When Mrs. Wellington discovered them together one evening, her fury was volcanic. She accused Maya of being a gold digger, of seducing her son for money. She threatened to fire her again, to make sure she never worked in the city again. But Ethan stood firm. He told his mother that Maya was the best thing that had ever happened to him, that she'd shown him what real integrity looked like. He said if his family couldn't accept her, then he'd leave and build a life somewhere else. For a woman like Victoria Wellington, this was unthinkable. Her son, her heir, walking away from the family fortune over a maid? She tried everything to break them apart. She offered Maya money to leave. She tried to arrange other matches for Ethan with women from appropriate families. She even hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on Maya's past, hoping to find something, anything, that would prove her suspicions right. But there was nothing to find. Maya's life had been simple and honest. She'd worked hard, taken care of her family, and never taken shortcuts. In the end, it was Mr. Wellington who surprised everyone. He'd been watching his son during these months, seeing a strength and conviction in Ethan that he'd never noticed before. One evening, he called Ethan into his study. Maya waited nervously outside, certain this would be the moment everything fell apart. But when Ethan emerged an hour later, his eyes were bright with tears. His father had given them his blessing. Not because he suddenly saw Maya as an equal, not because he'd had some magical change of heart about class and privilege, but because he recognized that his son was willing to sacrifice everything for this woman, and that kind of love was rare. He told Ethan that if Maya could inspire that kind of loyalty, then maybe she was exactly who the Wellington family needed. 6 months later, Maya and Ethan were engaged. The wedding was small, nothing like the elaborate affair his parents had originally planned. Maya's sister was her maid of honor, tears streaming down her face as she watched her big sister marry into a life they'd never dreamed possible. Some of the household staff attended, including Sophie, who'd become Maya's closest friend. Mrs. Wellington was there too, her smile tight and forced, but she was there. She'd realized that fighting this battle would only push her son further away. And perhaps, in some small corner of her heart, she'd begun to see what everyone else already knew. Maya wasn't after money or status. She genuinely loved Ethan, and more than that, she'd made him a better person. The months after their wedding were blissful. Maya enrolled in night classes to finish her degree. Ethan started a foundation to help young people from low-income backgrounds access education and job training. They were building a life together that honored both where they'd come from and where they hoped to go. But life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. And the test that was coming would shake everything they'd built. Started with a phone call. Maya was at home, studying for an exam, when her phone rang. It was a lawyer from a firm she'd never heard of, asking if she could come in for a meeting. When she asked what it was about, The lawyer's tone became carefully neutral. He said it concerned her late mother's estate. Maya was confused. Her mother had died when she was 8 years old, and as far as she knew, there was no estate. Her mother had been a housekeeper just like her, working multiple jobs to keep food on the table. What estate could there possibly be? But curiosity got the better of her, and she agreed to meet. Ethan insisted on coming with her. They sat in the lawyer's office 2 days later, and what they heard changed everything. Maya's mother, it turned out, had been adopted as a child. Her biological family had been wealthy, but there'd been some kind of scandal that led to her being given up. The lawyer explained that Maya's biological grandmother had recently passed away, and in her will, she'd left a substantial inheritance to any living descendants of her lost daughter. That meant Maya. The inheritance wasn't billions, but it was significant. Enough to change someone's life completely. Enough to make Maya financially independent. The lawyer handed her documents showing property deeds, stock certificates, and bank accounts. Maya sat in stunned silence, trying to process what this meant. Her whole life, she'd thought she came from nothing. She'd defined herself by her poverty, by her struggle. And now she was being told that she had family she'd never known, wealth she'd never imagined. Ethan squeezed her hand. He could see the confusion in her eyes, the way this revelation was shaking her sense of identity. On the drive home, Maya was quiet. Finally, she spoke. She said she didn't know if she wanted the money. It felt wrong somehow, profiting from a family that had abandoned her mother. Ethan listened, then gently pointed out that her grandmother had tried to make amends in the only way she could. By leaving Maya this inheritance, she was acknowledging the wrong that had been done, trying to give back what had been taken. Over the next few weeks, Maya struggled with the decision. She met with distant relatives she'd never known existed, people who looked at her with a mix of curiosity and resentment. Some of them had expected to inherit that money themselves. Others were genuinely happy to discover a long-lost cousin. In the end, Maya accepted the inheritance. But she didn't keep it all. She set up a trust fund for her sister's education. She donated a large portion to organizations that helped domestic workers know their rights and access legal support. She invested some of it in Ethan's foundation, and she kept enough to ensure that she'd never be in the position she'd been in that rainy night, standing outside the Wellington gates with nowhere to go. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd started as a maid, been accused of stealing, fallen in love with a wealthy man, and now had wealth of her own. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, but Maya knew the truth was more complicated. She'd been lucky, yes, lucky that Ethan had believed in her, lucky that the truth came out, lucky that her grandmother's lawyer had been able to track her down. But she'd also worked hard, maintained her integrity even when it would have been easier to be bitter, and refused to let other people's judgments define who she was. That's what she wanted people to understand. Not that wealth or status made someone worthy, but that dignity didn't depend on bank accounts. 2 years passed. Maya graduated with her degree in social work. She started working with families who employed domestic workers, helping to create fair contracts and safe working conditions. The Wellington family had changed too. Natalie had gone to therapy, addressed her addiction issues, and was slowly rebuilding her relationship with the family. Mrs. Wellington still struggled with Maya sometimes, but she'd learned to respect her, especially after seeing the good work Maya was doing in the community. And then Maya got pregnant. It was unexpected but joyful news. She and Ethan prepared for parenthood with a mix of excitement and terror, the way all first-time parents do. But 3 months into the pregnancy, Maya started experiencing severe complications. She was rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night, bleeding and in pain. The doctors did everything they could, but they couldn't save the baby. Maya and Ethan lost their child that night. The grief was crushing. Maya withdrew into herself, spending days in bed, unable to eat or sleep. She'd been through hardship before, but this was different. This wasn't something she could work her way out of or solve with determination. This was pure loss, and it hollowed her out. Ethan grieved too, but he also worried about Maya. He'd seen her strong before, resilient in the face of injustice and hardship. But now she seemed broken in a way he didn't know how to fix. Mrs. Wellington, surprisingly, was the one who reached out. She came to visit Maya one afternoon, bringing no grand gestures or empty platitudes. She simply sat beside Maya's bed and held her hand. She told Maya about her own miscarriage years ago, before Ethan was born. She talked about the guilt she'd felt, the way she'd blamed herself, the darkness that had nearly consumed her. Maya listened, tears rolling down her cheeks. It was the first time she'd felt truly understood since the loss. Mrs. Wellington told her something that would stay with her forever. She said grief doesn't mean you're weak. It means you loved deeply, and that's never something to be ashamed of. Over the following months, Maya slowly found her way back. She joined a support group for women who'd experienced pregnancy loss. She started going to therapy. She let herself feel the pain instead of trying to push it away. And gradually, life began to have color again. A year later, Maya and Ethan decided to try again. This time, the pregnancy went smoothly. 9 months later, they welcomed a baby girl they named Grace. Grace Victoria Wellington Rodriguez. A name that honored both families, both worlds. When Maya held her daughter for the first time, she thought about everything she'd been through. The rainy night she'd been thrown out. The moment Ethan had stopped his car. The inheritance that changed her circumstances. The loss that had nearly broken her. The love that had held her together. It had all led here, to this moment, holding this tiny perfect human who didn't care about money or status or where her mother had come from. Grace just knew she was loved, and that, Maya realized, was everything. The Wellington mansion was different now. Maya and Ethan had moved into their own place, but they visited often. The household staff were treated better, paid fairly, given days off and respect. Maya had made sure of that. Mrs. Wellington had even started a scholarship fund for children of domestic workers, inspired by Maya's story. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions sometimes, still moments when old prejudices surfaced. But there was also genuine effort to do better, to be better. As I wrap up this story, I want to ask you something. What would you have done if you were in Maya's position that night in the rain? Would you have gotten in Ethan's car? Or would you have kept walking, too proud or too scared to accept help? And what about forgiveness? Maya eventually forgave the Wellington family for how they treated her. She built a relationship with people who'd been ready to destroy her over a lie. Could you have done that? Would you have wanted to? Think about the maids, the housekeepers, the cleaners in your own life if you employ them. Think about the people who work in the background, making your life easier. Do you know their names? Do you know their stories? Maya's story is unique in many ways, but it's also a reminder of something we often forget. Every person you encounter has a full life, dreams, struggles, and dignity. Whether they're cleaning your house or running a company. Whether they're rich or barely getting by. The way we treat people when we have power over them reveals who we really are. The Wellingtons learned that lesson the hard way. They almost lost their son because they couldn't see past their own prejudices. They almost destroyed an innocent woman because it was easier than asking questions. But here's the thing that makes this story worth telling. They changed. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. Mrs. Wellington went from a woman who saw Maya as less than human to a woman who held her hand through grief. Mr. Wellington went from wanting to bury the truth to supporting his son's choice. Natalie went from a selfish addict to someone trying to make amends. People can change. Families can heal. But it requires humility, effort, and a willingness to admit when you're wrong. It requires seeing people, not as their bank accounts or their job titles. Maya's story reminds us that our circumstances don't define our worth. She was just as valuable when she was a broke maid as she was when she inherited money. The money didn't make her a better person. It just made her life easier. Her character, her integrity, her capacity for love, those things were there all along. So the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on what they do or what they have, remember Maya standing in the rain. Remember that you have no idea what someone has been through, what they're capable of, or what their future holds. The person you look down on today might be the one who changes your life tomorrow. This is the power of these stories. They don't just entertain us. They challenge us to examine our own biases, our own treatment of others, our own definitions of worth and dignity. Maya's journey from poverty to the Wellington family wasn't just about romance or money. It was about the slow, painful process of people learning to see each other as human. And in a world that's increasingly divided by wealth, status, and power, that might be the most important story we can tell. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the people in your own life differently, then it served its purpose. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Talk about it with your family. Let it change how you interact with the world. And remember, kindness doesn't cost anything, but the lack of it can cost everything. The Wellingtons almost lost their son because they couldn't extend basic decency to someone they considered beneath them. Don't make the same mistake. Thank you for watching this story with me. If you found it meaningful, subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of our shared humanity. Leave a comment below telling us what resonated with you most. And until next time, treat everyone you meet with the dignity they deserve. You never know whose life you might be changing, or who might end up changing yours.